Please turn in your Bibles to John chapter 15, verse 5. John 15, 5. I am the vine, ye are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit, for without me ye can do nothing.
So when Oscar texted me this morning, and I say, we've got it covered, in part I mean I've got it covered, but it doesn't work that way, Arlene steps up, and Donna steps up, and Dale steps up, and Susan steps up, and we've got it covered. So if I tell you, can make one more, I'll make one more deal with you. You don't call this a sermon, and we'll be much better off. What we're going to do is we're going to look at John chapter 15, and we're going to just kind of do a Bible study / Sabbath school / whatever comes into my head. So, is this working? Testing 1, 2, 3. Yeah, it's working, he says. I got a thumbs up from the back. So I have been thinking about John 15 more seriously. I've been reading the book by Andrew Murray. This basically covers the relationship between the vine and the branches and the father, who is the keeper, right? The husbandman, as the King James Version says. And so I've been thinking about that, and I started thinking, I wish that this kind of picture, the vine and the branch, had kind of become our source for how we understood our relationship. Because everybody here comes with different baggage, right? We've heard sermons. Some of those sermons have been inside of the church. Some of them have been outside. We've talked to people. We've had discussions, about God. We've had thoughts about God. We've read various books. And we all have these little variant pictures, these different pictures of what God is to us and how we relate to God. And I was thinking how nice it would be if I could go back and kind of purge all that and just start with John 15. If I just had the picture that Christ gave us in John 15, where he says, I am the vine and ye are the branches. And I started with there, and then from there establish a much better foundation of my relationship with God. And so we're going to do a little talking about what that means. So when he says, well, let's start with verse 15:1. I am the true vine. That statement, I am the true vine, when is that statement for? What is the tense of the verb in I am the true vine? Present tense. When was he talking? I'm going to need your help, so you can just show right out. How long ago approximately was he talking? A couple thousand years ago. So if he was the true vine in the first century, is he the true vine for us today? Absolutely, right? When he says, I am the true vine, it's not only a statement of present tense, but it's also a statement of absolute truth. Okay? He is not sometimes the vine. He is not occasionally something else to us. The relationship he's trying to describe is one of absolute certitude. Now I'm going to skip by, and my father is the husbandman for a second, which is the latter part of verse 1. And the reason, when I started tearing this apart, I thought, well, how can I talk about this? I could divide basically the vine, the job of the husbandman, and the branch. And we could look at each of these separately. Well, I found it was easier to separate the work of the husbandman from the process, but whenever I talked about the vine, I ended up talking about the branch. And whenever I talked about the branch, I ultimately ended up talking about the vine. Why would that be? Yeah, because I can't separate them, right? They don't separate easily. Verse 2, John 15, verse 2. So if you're not in John 15, feel free to turn there, because that's kind of where we're going to anchor. I may make a few runs here and there, but that's where we're going to anchor. Every branch in me that beareth not fruit, he taketh away. He being the Father, the husbandman, right? And every branch that beareth fruit, he purgeth, that it may bring forth more fruit. And again, I'm just going to leave that and move to verse 3. Now ye are clean, and that's interesting. I'm just going to inject this. That word for clean is the same word that's used for purging in the previous verse. Okay? It's a different tense of the verb. Okay? But basically, he's talking about the Father purges us, and now you are purged, if you want to use that language. Or the Father cleans us, and now we are clean, if you want to use that word. Or if we want to use the word pruned, which is how we understand the activity for a vine, he prunes us in verse 2, and now we are pruned in verse 3. Okay? Make sense? Okay. Now we're going to go to 15:4. Abide in me, and I in you. This is interesting. There's two activities that are happening here. So let's break them apart for a second. What are they? Abide in me, and I will abide in you is the inferred text, right? Those are two different things, are they not? Right? Two different activities. So if we're going to separate those two activities and we look at the abide in me portion, how do I abide in Christ? Because this becomes very important, does it not?
By faith.
By faith, okay. What does that mean? Give me something in my hand, something I can do.
I spend time with him each day.
Okay, that's one of the ways I abide is I spend time with him. Okay.
Relying on his promises.
Ah, I like that. Actually, that is in a large part what he's talking about, because he talks about a little later on about my words abiding in you. And when he's talking about his words, he's talking about what he has promised us. The capability that he has promised he's going to give us dwells in us. And we hold on to that. And that's also that faith word again, right? We hold on to that knowing that to be true. Okay, now let's take that a little step back. What does it mean for Christ to be a vine? What is the vine to the branch? Source of life. Okay. Anything else? I thought I missed somebody. So, okay. So we have the vine is the source of life. Source of anything else? Strength. Okay. Support. What is the Father primarily concerned with when he deals with the branches that are connected to the vine? Fruit, right? So it's the source of fruit. When we talk about fruit that comes from God, what are we talking about? Sorry? Okay, yes. Yeah, fruit can be good or bad. Primarily when we're talking about a connected branch, we're talking about good works, right? The works that God produces or the Spirit produces in us through that connection, right? So there's a lot of language here. Let's go back to that first one we mentioned, life. I think sometimes we think of God as a God of product, okay? And even though I had to work it out of you to get to fruit, I think sometimes we think that God is a God that produces product in us, and then we go looking for product. I know that among church members, it's not uncommon for us to go looking for product among fellow church members, right? How are they doing? What are they doing, right? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? If it's a bad thing, I have something to say about that. And But we have this idea that God produces product, whether it's leaves or sprouts or, fruit. What if we take a step back from there and we talk about him being our very lives? What does it mean for us to be anchored in everything? So are we talking, when you said life, that life is what we receive from the vine, did you mean spiritual life or physical life? Both. How much of your spiritual life is dependent upon Christ? 100%. Okay, 100%, all of it. Now, is that easier to say or easier to do? If you fail at doing something, whose fault is it? See, I was gambling you weren't going to say that. But if God is entirely, he says, if Christ says, I am the vine, and in me is sourced your spiritual life, right? Then if I fail of doing something, have I failed or did Christ fail? Well, we know it has to be me, right? Which is why we all laughed when Susan said what she did, right? It has to be me. Okay, so now if I'm still looking at fruit here, right? I'm still all very fruit focused, and I'm saying, well, the fruit didn't appear, or the fruit that was supposed to be good didn't come out looking very good, right? I used to have an orchard in White Rock, and frequently, we had an apple tree amazing huge apples, but inevitably, when the apple became ripe, you would break them in half and it would be rotten in the center. Okay? And so my father, who was the husbandman of that orchard, cut off a bunch of branches off that tree, but he didn't cut down the trunk. He went and spliced in a whole bunch of different varieties of apples, and eventually that apple tree was amazingly productive, and it produced, I think we had 5 different varieties of apples growing on one tree. Okay? It was the most amazing tree in the whole orchard, but it had started out being a very bad tree. But when we don't see the fruit that we want to see in ourselves, then we tend to say, what is our reaction? Let me not tell you what your reaction. When you don't see, let's say you did something bad. Let's say and I don't mean catastrophically bad, okay? You didn't murder anybody, but you treated somebody in a way that probably wasn't how a Christian would treat somebody. Okay? What would you say? What promise would you make to yourself?
I'll never do that again.
I'll never do that again. Thank you, Susan. There's a temptation to do that, right? We're fruit-oriented, and so we're going to say, I will never do that again. So when I say that, what does my belief system look like? Who am I saying was responsible for the bad fruit? Well, I was. Basically, if I say I'm not going to do it again, which means the subtext to that statement is that I can produce good fruit, and next time that's what I'm going to do, right? That fruit is in my control. If I say that fruit is in my control, what am I saying about Christ's role in my life? Secondary. Or he has none, right? So I will devote myself now to producing better fruit. And the next day when I fail again, if I mess up when I'm talking to somebody or dealing with a situation, or I become impatient or frustrated, and I'll say, oh, I messed up again. I got to stop doing that. Because we're very doing focused. We're very fruit focused. And this isn't just a Christian issue. It's something we grew up with. It's something we packed into the church with us, and we found it here, so that kind of supports that idea that somehow fruit is somehow my responsibility. Now, I'm not letting you off the hook, because everybody that's sitting here knows it's their responsibility to some degree, right? Is fruit somewhat your responsibility?
Because we got to be connected to the vine.
There you go. Thank you, Barry. Yeah, our problem is not the fruit, it is our connection. So when I fail, what does that tell me? Is that a fruit problem or a root problem? It's a connection problem. I got cool feedback. It's a connection problem, right? So if I fail, my failure is basically a litmus test of how my connection is doing. It has far less to do with the fruit I'm producing. Bad fruit, Christ said it, right? Bad fruit, it means a bad tree. Right? So the relationship between the vine is everything. So my spiritual life, now if I talk about my spiritual life, which we all agreed that Christ is responsible for that life. Okay? So that inflowing life from the vine is how much responsible for my spiritual growth, my development as a Christian, everything, 100%. Right? But do we deal with him on that? When my growth isn't what it should be, do I make excuses for it? If my growth isn't what it should be, do I go back and say, oh, well, there are multiple kinds of Christians. There are super Christians like Paul. Paul was a super Christian. I'm just one of the mediocre ones, right? Okay. I had a good friend of mine, and he used to say, that there was this kind of strata for people that entered heaven. There was those who had, robes and crowns, and there were some who had, the trim on the bottom of their robe, showing that they were martyrs. And he said, I just want to get in my underwear. Okay? I don't care how I get in. I don't care how richly I am decorated when I get there. I just want to squeak through the door just before the doors close. But the point is that there are no super Christians. There's only one kind of Christian. The very definition of what a Christian is Christ dwelling in you. That is what a Christian is. It is Christianity. It is Christ-likeness. It is Christ in me. That is what a Christian is. There isn't some of us who've attained to more or obtained more. Yes, there is a greater power, a greater evidence of the presence of Christ in us. But all Christians have Christ in them. That is what a Christian is. And in order to have Christ in you, you have to be sacrificed to the vine. So let's talk about a branch for a minute. What is a disconnected branch? If you take the branch away from the vine, it's dead. Is it possible to have a living branch separated from the vine? No. That the only thing the vine needs to partake of the power, the strength, the life of the vine is connection. That's it. Now, when we realize this, because as I begin to realize this, and I realize it more and more, it takes a lot of stress off. What is my requirement before God? I'm not going to stand there anymore. What is my requirement before God? That connection. Yeah. Are you connected? That's it. The life of Christ in you is his responsibility. He says, I bring with me, I'm packing, I'm carrying all this goodness, all this righteousness, all this fruit, all this ability. That's my desire for you. I'm just waiting to pour it into you. All you need to do is be connected to me. And that connection is, step one, is believing that that's true. Because that's a promise that Christ makes to us in John chapter 15. And if he makes the promise, then the same individual who promises that is the same individual who said, let there be light. And there was light, and it was good. He speaks the truth of his power into your life, and you just have to accept it. When he says that you abide in me and you will gain the life and the power and the ability that I bring with me, when you accept that by faith and you say that state between you and I exists because I have accepted it, because I've given you the entirety of my life, and now that state exists. Satan would love for you to walk out of here and say, well, maybe it exists or maybe it doesn't. Maybe I have to do something else. Okay? Picture that dead branch laying there in the vineyard, being trodden underfoot, and you think, well, why doesn't it connect itself to the vine if that's possible? Why doesn't it receive life from the vine if that's possible? But in the mind, okay, branches don't have minds, so we'll stretch this a little bit. But in the mind of the dead branch, it's saying, I'm just going to get a little greener. I'm just going to get a little fruit. If I could get just a couple buds, showing that fruit's coming, then the vine will say, hey, that looks like a good branch. Let's hook up with that. How ridiculous is that? Because all of the strength, all of the life, all of the nourishment comes from the vine. It would be ridiculous for the branch to say, I will sit here separated from the vine and bring something to the table. Maybe what I'll try to be is Christ-like. Maybe I'll try to look like the vine. That's what Christ-like looks like, right? I'll try to look like the vine. I'll be as big as it is. I'll produce all kinds of fruit on the ends of my branches. It'll be amazing. And then the vine will say, hey, you and I, we need to get together. But it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Anything that you think you're capable of doing without Christ is an illusion. Nothing. You've got nothing. You'll have nothing. You can't bring anything to the table. You cannot impress him. He knows who you are. He knows all your faults and failures. And just by a reputation of human reputation, I know in part who you are. I know in part what your weaknesses are, your doubts and your fears, your tendency to rely on everything else, anything else, but who God is. There's a couple more verses I jotted down here. When think about that connection. The vine connects itself to the branch. The branch only wills it, only desires it. Bernice. Okay? That's an entirely different metaphor. Yeah. Yeah, everything, right? So picture the dead branch and the living, powerful vine. And we'll read from Ezekiel 36. It says, a new heart also will I give you. New heart. And a new spirit I will put within you, and I will take away the stony heart, the dead heart, out of your flesh. And I will give you a heart of flesh, a living heart. And I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes. Walking in his statutes is fruit, is it not? And who causes us to walk in his statutes? He does. Because everything that is good comes from the vine. All your ability, all your capability comes from Christ. We want to think that I did something. Other than connectedness, other than my will, other than my faith that he can do these things, we want to believe that we are able to do something. But we're wrong. There's no good fruit except that it comes from, I wasn't supposed to stand here. There's no good fruit except that it comes from the vine, except that he grows it. He creates it. And it bears out on our branches to our surprise. Because the branch knows it didn't do anything. Have you ever read Paul's language about the things that he did? How much credit does he take for it? Does he look at his life and say, I did this and I did that? I'm a pretty amazing guy? That's not his language, is it? All of Paul's language is of one tone. It is not I, right? It is Christ. When you realize that you are a dead branch now, and you can only be made a living branch through the connectedness to the vine, and that is where you place all your energy. That is where you place all your time. That is where you place all your passion. Because you know that in the connectedness to the vine is the outgrowth of the fruit. Is the outgrowth of all the capability that Christ offers for you. That's stunning. 2 Peter 1:4, whereby are given unto us exceeding great and precious promises, that by these ye might be partakers of the divine nature. Partakers of the divine nature is a branch that is grafted into the vine. That's how you partake of the divine nature. He grows it in you. He lives it in you. We were discussing this. We get some knowing looks around the room because part of this all came up at a prayer meeting on Tuesday. But the capability of God is laying there. It is vital, present, and willing for you to access. That's it. All we have to do is allow him to do that in us. That is a message of Christ our righteousness. Break those three words out. Christ our righteousness. Christ is my righteousness. Christ is my ability. Christ is my power. Christ is my victory. Christ is my fruit. Everything that I am to be, all the requirement that's placed in the Bible is a requirement that says you need to be this. Galatians 5, fruits of the Spirit, love, peace, joy. You cannot generate those. You only generate those by tapping into who the vine is and allowing him to generate them in you. It's amazing. The free gift of God. 1 Thessalonians 5:23. And the very God of peace is going to do what? Sanctify you wholly. If you thought that was a job that you had in your hands, if you thought that was something you were going to do, best of luck, because it doesn't work. The very God of peace sanctify you wholly. And I pray, God, your whole spirit and soul and body be preserved blameless. Blameless. All we can do and all we can bring to that word, that idea of blameless, is incapability, because I can't do it. And if nothing else, I've proven to myself day after day, year after year, that I'm incapable of doing it. What do we have to do? Time's almost up. What do we have to do? Put something in your hands. Take a promise. Start there. Take the promise from Ezekiel that he's going to create a new heart in you and take out the dead one. Take that promise and bring it to God and know that the fullness of the capability of that promise is in God's hands. When God came upon the earth was formless and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. That's who you are. And he said, let there be light. When you read in Ezekiel, read, let there be light. Because God speaks righteousness into our lives. That is how you get it. He promised it. Then trust him. And whenever you encounter doubt, whenever you encounter the words that say, he can't do this, I don't think he can handle it, or maybe he could do it for a guy like Paul, but he can't do it for a guy like me, that is not God's voice. It's not even yours. Because God can fully speak that into your lives. That is his capability. Let's bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for this grace. And we ask, Father, for your presence of your Spirit in each one of these lives. Because we know, Father, that it is in your Spirit is the capability, is the life that we so long for, the life that we so desire. We ask, Father, that we can get just a piece of that vision, that we may just see. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Our closing song is number 50.